Hello, and welcome to this special edition of really both the Superhero Ethics and the Star Wars Universe podcast. I think this is going to go out on both feeds because this is kind of a hodgepodge of topics, all stemming from one recent event that brings up a lot that we love to talk about on both of these podcasts. And I'm here, Matthew, with our new co-host for Superhero Ethics, Riki Hayashi. And the event we're starting with is the recent death of James Earl Jones. James Earl Jones has been an important figure for, anyone who's connected to American movies and stage and Black experience and all sorts of other things for quite a long time. And of course, plays a very special role in the hearts of Star Wars fans, such as myself and Riki, and I think so many of our listeners, as the voice of Darth Vader. And we're thinking and talking about, do we want to do a memorial episode about him and talk about just him? Not sure if that made sense necessarily, since we know a lot of other great people are doing that, but definitely we wanted to talk about him somewhat. And as we were talking, we realized that there's also a very interesting issue that gets brought up by his, because he had specifically about that in his last years, they recorded his voice, I'm sure doing all the things, like probably saying every particular word they could think of that was necessary for this, so that they now have the legal rights to use his voice. They can AI generate his voice to say anything they want Darth Vader to say going forward in perpetuity. And so we wanted to talk about all of that. And then just one more thing into the mix as we were talking. Riki mentioned that just having dropped a couple days ago, although it'll probably be a little continuation of the Terminator story, which does some really interesting things with the role of AI in those movies and the fundamental assumption of all the movies up till now, which is that when an AI becomes sentient, it and humanity would have to become enemies and we have to fight that fight. So, Riki, let me just say welcome. And I guess maybe let's just start with the James Earl Jones part of it. What was your feeling when you heard that he had passed away?
Well, any death brings some sadness for sure. Just like human life ceasing to exist. And when it's a public figure, there is kind of reckoning of their life. And in this case, James Earl Jones, in my opinion, led a very positive and fruitful life and contributed to the arts in a way that so many people can appreciate. And as you said, as Star Wars fans, the most iconic voice in the franchise. And there's so many other amazing things that he did. Like for me personally, I said my favorite James Earl Jones role and moment was in the movie Field of Dreams, where he gives this speech at the end. Like it's like 3 minutes talking about baseball and its place in American history and how, it's to me one of the most iconic movie speeches of all time.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite movies, partly for that reason. And then, of course, a lot of people will identify with the Lion King, right? Mufasa, Simba's father, and so many other roles. So it's always sad, but we have this legacy that we can remember him by, which I think is very special.
We really do. We really do. And I have a couple of my experiences outside of Star Wars that really struck with me about him, both other things that I've seen him in, and also he was the speaker at my college graduation, which was just an incredible moment. And I'll say more about both of those, but let's just start with Star Wars itself and talk about why he was so important there. And one of the first things I'll say is, and I'm often talking about how much I enjoy books on tape, book Audible and things like that. And the Star Wars books, they've been doing a lot to basically produce them. So it's not just one person reading a book. It's the person will often do different voices, but sometimes they get different voice actors for different parts. There's often a lot of sound effects or music in stirring parts, things like that. Like they're really kind of almost audio plays, readings of these books.
Really?
And go ahead.
I'm sorry. So like, do they have like lightsaber, like the snap hiss of a lightsaber igniting and stuff like that?
They'll have the snap hiss of a lightsaber. They'll have laser sounds. during an important moment, they might play the Imperial March or play the Jedi kind of like rising again sound music and stuff like that. Like they definitely bring in a lot of great things like that.
Wow.
The reason I mention it though is that, and with all due respect to the fantastic creators who've been doing this, I find I like the High Republic books the most because for the most part, those are new characters for us. They're not using characters we already know, because when someone else is trying to do the voice of Princess Leia or Han Solo or Luke or Lando or someone like that, it can be hit or miss. And honestly, the time it has always been a miss is when it's Darth Vader. And this is all kind of a roundabout way of saying that I think it's a sign of just how iconic James and how unique James Earl Jones's voice is, because one of my biggest journeys with Star Wars and a journey of realizing that Star Wars is a lot more than, and always has been a lot more than just good guys, bad guys, I think is the character of Darth Vader. And Paul Hoppy, who's a frequent guest and was a co-host of this podcast in the past, he really, when we were in high school and college, got me thinking more about the idea of that in many ways, Darth Vader is one of the protagonists of the trilogy, or if not the protagonist, one of the characters who goes through the most growth. And it's not that he has this sudden change at the end of Return of the Jedi, but that you can see over the course of Empire, him wrestling with his loyalty towards the Emperor, him wrestling with his feelings about this challenger in the Force who actually then is his son, and what does that mean, and what is his loyalty to his son, and what is his loyalty toward the Emperor, and all of that. And I don't think anything of that is possible without James Earl Jones voice acting. And it to me, it's really a testament how he was able to be both terrifyingly scary. I mean, especially if you saw Star Wars as a kid, but even as an adult, I think you recognize like his voice as Darth Vader when he's being threatening is terrifying and powerful, but also just the amount of emotion and like it's all such a restrained performance, but it's such a rich one as Darth Vader.
Yeah. It was absolutely an amazing performance throughout. And it's really interesting if you go back and watch A New Hope, like that first scene on the Tantive 4, it feels a little different. His vocal performance from a lot of other Vader that he's done. Yeah. So it's an interesting start, but definitely like once you settle into the franchise, I think it finds its place. Not to say that first opening scene is bad, but it's just different. Like if you're used to like 90% of Darth Vader and you go back and watch A New Hope, you're like, wow, there's something a little different about it. Like the I don't know, almost excitement. Like you said, Vader is like such a restrained character. Like that first scene, he's like very animated, like vocally, in my opinion. So
1 second, a technical thing. Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. So you just finished speaking. Remind me the last thing you said.
I was talking about the opening scene of A New Hope.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think in many ways that scene is the last time we see him before he starts being challenged, because I think the next scene we see him in is when he's in the kind of Imperial board meeting on the Death Star, and they start talking about what this technological terror can do, and doubting him in the Force. And the first time we start seeing him as kind of an outsider compared to everything else. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think have you heard anyone else doing the voice of Darth Vader?
Yeah, I mean, in the Clone Wars, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, no, that's
It's
just canon.
Anakin in Rebels,
Um, Rebels is still James Earl Jones.
right?
I'm,
And
I'm
so
looking at
was
the I'm looking
Rogue
at the
One.
credits. There are people. Matt Sloan is credited for some Lego Star Wars things. So I don't know if that's Vader or not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's like Lego Star Wars. A couple of other people are credited, but from here I can't tell if it's Darth Vader or Anakin Skywalker.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, it's just I think his performance there was amazing, and it's gonna be interesting to talk about what does it mean that we have his voice going forward. And I want to get to that in a moment. First, let's just talk a little bit more about some of the other things we saw him in. You talked about Field of Dreams. I don't remember word for word that speech, but I certainly have memories of it because I loved that movie. It's probably been 10 years since I saw it, but I loved his performance. I'll always remember him using the insect repellent thing to send Kevin Costner's character back to the 60s. But I did really love it, and I think especially because he's the character in that movie I much more identify with, not the person who's the total idealist from the beginning, but the person who has to be convinced, the person who starts from a very cynical perspective. And I think there's a moment of just utter wonder that he gets when he starts to see what's happening on the Field of Dreams that 99% of our audience probably is too young to remember this movie. It's about baseball, but it's about fantasy, and it's about this idea of baseball bringing the past back to life. And I don't want to spoil it. It's a really fun movie, but there's a definite magic realism in the movie. And the moment when James Earl Jones first starts to experience that is just heartbreaking and really tender and beautiful.
I think you'd be surprised by how many people have watched it.
I hope so.
Specifically because Major League Baseball has made a point of embracing that movie as part of its history. And
Mm.
recently, I think in two separate seasons, there's a field now, a baseball field in Iowa with a cornfield behind it, the Field of Dreams field, or I don't know what the official
Mm.
name is, but they've had two regular season games as like special exhibitions
Oh, that's
there
cool.
at that field. So I think a lot of baseball fans have become reacquainted with that movie through those games and the publicity from it.
My sense is that our audience is much more on the sports ball side of things, but that's certainly possible. And I'll just say, if you haven't seen the movie, it is kind of cheesy. It is very 80s, but especially if you have any love of baseball, any love of magic realism, or have any father trauma in your life, I think there's a lot of good things to be said about that movie. The
It's
performance for me, though,
sorry, I just want to add also like this movie was in the 80s, I think like 86 or 87, but there's a scene in it where the main character and his wife they have a daughter, and they
Mhm.
go to a community, I guess, school board meeting to
Oh
talk,
yeah,
where people are wanting to ban books. Specifically, they go because one of the books that's proposed to be banned is written by James Earl Jones's character Terrence Mann,
right,
who is like this 1960s hippie writer.
right. He's a
And
J.D. Salinger stand-in. It's very
yeah,
much about. I think it's supposed to be Catcher in the Rye and J.D. Salinger.
and they go to this meeting about banning books in schools, and the main characters are, on the liberal side, and they're like, how could you want to ban books, you Nazi?
Mm-hmm.
And in the 80s, like, Nazi was not what it is today. Like, it was, a thing of the past.
Yep.
Indiana Jones is punching Nazis, in this 1930s movie. So it's like, oh, ha ha ha. And I recently rewatched it, Field of Dreams. I was like, oh gosh, like, this is just happening again,
Yeah.
or still.
Years later, and we're still arguing about banning books.
Yeah.
So the performance of his that most comes to my mind, and it's funny because this is also very baseball themed, but from a very different direction, is Fences. And Fences is a play by August Wilson. For those who don't know, August Wilson was an incredible Black playwright who wrote a lot about the Black experience. And at one point, he wrote a whole series of plays, each of which is set in a different decade. And I forget which particular decade Fences is set in because I saw it many years ago. But the general plot of it is about James Earl Jones is playing an aging man who was in the Negro baseball leagues and has a lot of bitterness about the fact that his son now has a chance to play in the major leagues because the color line has been broken, Jackie Robinson and all of that. And it's a very different performance because there's a lot of bitterness, there's a lot of anger, but you still have to have some sympathy for the character, even while he's being in many ways the antagonist for many others. I didn't get a chance to see him on stage; I was too young. But there was a video that was running around for a while that I saw in my high school drama class that showed us a lot of clips of it, and just even in that, 19, film camera pointed at a stage in the 80s or the 70s or whenever it was, you could just see what a powerful actor he was. And, it's a play about the Black experience that is very much outside of my own necessarily, but I think it's a beautiful story because of how much it invites others to be able to better understand that and relate to it in ways that are, that it's a specific story in a specific context that isn't my own, but I can still relate to frustrations with a father and, ideas of what was the father's success and what will your son's success be and things like that. So yeah, just another amazing performance of his.
Yeah, he has a lot of kind of smaller roles in movies.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm just looking over the filmography. He was in the 1990s um, series of Jack Ryan movies,
Mm-hmm.
most notably The Hunt for Red October. So I think I recall he plays like a CIA. He plays like Jack Ryan's boss or something like
Yeah,
that.
his CIA mentor.
Yeah. And in that movie, Hunt for Red October, like the iconic moment for James Earl Jones is at the end of the movie where he says something like, "You heard that torpedo impact on the hull of the submarine, and I was never here." Right? Like this,
Mm-hmm.
like we're just gonna cover this up type thing.
Yep.
And his delivery of that is just so epic, and it's like a pretty small role, but he does that right, like because of his voice and the way he used like it's not just his voice, it's his acting as well. Like he knows how to use his voice in a way that projects incredible gravitas.
Yeah. And what I loved about him is not only was he able to do that, he was also very self-aware and really happy to make fun of himself. Um, again, dating myself here, but the David Letterman show, one of the precursors to Jay Leno and some of those others today. I guess Jay Leno is a precursor now as well, but um, the point being that he would sometimes go. The David Letterman show had a bit of the top 10 lists, and he would sometimes go on and read these lists of ridiculous things. Often they were like silly newspaper headlines or something like that, but in the very deep, like very kind of making fun of his own deep baritone, kind of making fun of his own like very deep sonorous voice. And I think there's a couple of movies where he also did that in a small way of kind of being a parody of himself. And I love when people can do that, when they have both the awareness of the power they have, but also they can have fun with it.
Hmm.
And that I think brings me to the college graduation speech that I want to talk about, because I graduated college in 1999. I'm sure that the concept of privilege already existed in the terms of the way it's talked about today. There was that great article that started the whole conversation about the backpack of privilege that we all carry around. And I never heard the word, though, and he never said the word, but his speech gave me the best understanding of that privilege that I've ever known, because I graduated from a liberal arts school in the East Coast. It was trying to be diverse, but it was what it was, and it was probably 80 to 85% white and overwhelmingly kids from affluent backgrounds who were able to pay for it and things like that. And he basically said, without being mean or without being harsh, but in his very deep voice, where, like, I feel like if he said, like, please get me a glass of milk, like, you feel like you have to get that glass of milk right there and then, no matter how nicely he says that. And what he basically said was, you have been given a gift. Now go make the world better because of it. And, we're 21. I have no idea how many people heard that and paid attention. I certainly did, but I was already kind of on a, I want to be a do-gooder path. But it was something I remembered a lot of the time when I thought about, like, what do I want to do with my life? Was the way he reminded us of, look at all the incredible things that have happened to you. Look at the education that you have. Look at the opportunities you have. And how do you think about others who don't have that? And how do you fix that? And how do you use the gifts that you have? And he did it in that way where, and I think this is often a talking point brought up against privilege ideas that is sometimes silly, that, a lot of people are like, oh, you're trying to make all white people feel guilty or all rich people feel guilty or something like that. I think that idea is often nonsense, but sometimes I think there is some element of that. There was none of that in what he said. It wasn't about trying to make us feel guilty. It wasn't about us trying to make us feel bad. It was about saying you should be really pleased and really honored that you have managed to accomplish what you managed to accomplish, but also recognize who's not sitting next to you. That was one thing I remember him saying, was asking us to think about who didn't get the chance to show they could accomplish what they might have accomplished because they're not here with you right now. And it was just mind-blowing. And I remember very little about the day. I don't remember a single word of the valedictorian speech or the head of the school speech. I remember I had gone planning to read a book for most of the time because I thought I'd be bored out of my mind, and I was for most of it. I couldn't read much of my book because it was raining. But his speech was something that both me and my family who were there talked about for years and years afterwards.
That's a beautiful memory, and I'm glad that you have that with you, because, like, it's such, talk about privilege, it's such a privilege to have been in that moment, like, to hear him, right?
Very much was, yeah.
Especially in a I mean, do you think there's a recording of that somewhere? You said like late 90s?
I don't know if there is, but I know that this was the year that Phantom Menace was coming out. I think Phantom Menace had actually just come out. No, yeah. Phantom Menace had just come out like 2 weeks beforehand, or a week beforehand, because that was the movie we watched to celebrate the end of our final exams as seniors. And I'm sure that he spoke at other graduations around that time and over the next couple of years. So if my version is not recorded, I'm sure there's probably recordings of it elsewhere.
Yeah. But that's the thing, is like, now we can go on YouTube and watch a commencement speech from just like any college these days, right? And so much is recorded now that we get to see. So like, to have a memory of something that may or may not have been recorded, that there was like a unique moment in history for you, that's very special.
I will say, as a confession, he ended the speech by saying, "And may the force be with you." And at lunch with my mother and a couple of friends of ours, my mother was saying, "Oh, of course he had to say that. How can he not have said that?" And my friends and I were like, "But Mom, Darth Vader never says that in the movies."
Push-up glasses.
Exactly.
Oh. Frozen? Well, I'm still here. I don't know. I don't know. Hello? How's everyone doing? I don't even know if people can still hear me at this point. Here we are. Just me and nobody. Well, I wish I had like a personal experience with James Earl Jones I could share, but no such luck. looking over some of his accomplishments. A lot of stuff. Wow, going back to the 60s. Performances in the 60s, 70s. So, like, from a movie perspective, definitely more of like, I think 90s was where he started to really pick up. Field of Dreams was the 80s, but I wonder if it's because in Star Wars it was just his voice. Well, gonna see if Matthew is coming back. They said they lost power, so stuff is rebooting.
All right, let's try this
No,
again. Looks
welcome
like
back.
I'm still recording, so
I just stayed here and kind of
right.
talked. Probably want to cut that out if it's part of the recording.
Well, listeners, I'm back from the power just dying on me. I'm thinking that's the power telling us that it's time for us to move on a little bit from this James Earl Jones conversation.
What is
Daniel
going on in
highlights
your
chat
area?
with us and says, "Yo, welcome, Daniel. Please ask any questions or give me thoughts you want to share during this conversation." So, Ricky, let's move into the next part of the conversation, which is one of the things that James Earl Jones did during his life was he made this deal with Disney. I think kind of recognizing how unique his voice was, and also money is nice. People like money, and they paid him, as I understand it, quite a lot of money for him to go in and record his voice saying all the things that the folks who do AI voices needed him to say, so that in theory now, for any project, they can have his voice create whatever they want him to say.
Yeah.
Now, the topic of AI and AI in media has been a very contentious one for some time, especially in recent years. We're starting to see a lot of AI creations and things like that, often done without the consent of the people involved. There's still news about a lawsuit apparently involving the use of Peter Cushing's image and voice in Rogue One. I don't know all the details about that. It seems like some part of his family agreed and some didn't, and it seems like it's kind of an internal struggle there. I don't know the details. But in this case, we have someone who, while he was alive, fully consented and worked with them to create this plan.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
I hate it. Like, I'm not going to mince words at all. I absolutely hate it.
For some reason I'm not hearing you. Hold on a second.
Well, I'll keep talking.
Okay, try that again. Start again.
Talking. Hello,
Yep.
hello.
I can hear you.
Okay. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. Like, I'm not going to mince words. It is, to me, like, this is, what's the word? Ghoulish, right? Like, ghoulish, like, to take a dead person and to continue to use them. Like, it is like the zombification of a performer. And I understand, like, while he was alive, he signed off on this. He gave consent. They paid him probably handsomely to allow this. I don't care. Like, good for him. And at least they are not like taking advantage of him without compensating him. I still feel very like disgusted by this. And I'm not looking forward to when this happens. I don't know yet if I'll skip whatever, Darth Vader appears in, like AI James Earl Jones. We'll see. But I don't like it. I think if someone passes or is unable to do a performance, let's just find someone else. There are other credible performers. It wouldn't be the same, but there are credible performers who could do this, right? And if you don't like the new performer, that's fine. But to use this technology in this way, it is just, like I said, it's ghoulish to me. I do not like this at all. Like, in this specific case, and in all of these other cases, especially like where performer did not give consent, is just legally like problematic, as you said, with Peter Cushing.
So how did you feel about what happened with Cushing and also with Carrie Fisher in Rogue One?
like I didn't know about them going in, and I still enjoy the movie. So yeah, I guess like maybe I will watch whatever AI James Earl Jones appears in because it's Star Wars. Like I'm not a paragon of morality on this. Like, but my going into it, I did not know. And then when Peter Cushing, when Tarkin appeared on the screen, my first reaction was like excitement. Oh, like Grand Moff Tarkin, like of course,
Yeah.
because it's a movie about the Death Star. And I was like, wait a minute, Peter Cushing is dead. And then like when you watch the performance, when you watch what's happening on screen, I was like, this is not real. That this is not real in any way. Like the technology was still like in that phase where you could just tell, right? And I was like, what is this? And then like Carrie Fisher at the end, Princess Leia, that was even worse. Like the facial whatever mapping.
Yeah.
And I actually just watched Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny last night. And that's a real person. Like Harrison Ford is still alive. He did all of the motion capture or whatever, but there's a scene where it's supposed to be him when he's younger.
Yeah.
And it looked like a video game. I was like, this is just not, this is not believable. The technology is not there for this, for the facial stuff and the vocal stuff. Like, I don't know how it's gonna sound like with this. And I don't want it in general, I guess. Like let performers perform, and all of this stuff is just, I don't like the way it's going. I think this is my when I was a kid moment, I feel like.
Yeah.
Is that people are going to grow up with this and be used to it, and the technology is going to improve to the point where probably won't be able to tell, and I'll just be sitting in my rocking chair going like shaking my fist at these AI performances. And there's like all the legal ramifications. Like during the SAG-AFTRA strike, they were really trying to get ahead of this and say, hey, we don't want studios to be able to not pay us because they're using AI us.
Mm-hmm.
What was one of the things of contention.
Yeah, I really appreciate hearing your thoughts on it, because I'll admit I'm a lot more mixed, but I think more and more I'm leaning towards where you are. In Rogue One, I think I was just so blown away by the story. Nothing about Peter Cushing's that version of Grand Moff Tarkin looked weird to me. I know many others felt a very kind of uncanny valley feeling with it. And although I think like on second and third watches, it definitely starts to seem weird. The moment at the end of that movie, where you turn around and see that it is Princess Leia and she says what she says, I mean, I got so many goosebumps and teared up at that moment that I feel like that really worked for me, especially because it was so quick. I didn't get the sense that you're getting. And originally, when I heard about James Earl Jones, part of my thought was good, because it should always just be his voice, and his voice is so unique and so powerful and things like that. But of course, it's not going to be that. It's never going to be just the one in a million people. I think there very much is a sort of like, let the camel's nose under the tent. The whole thing's going to get in. Probably butchering that metaphor, but you know what I mean. And I think for me, the ghoulish part doesn't bother me as much. What I think, though, what really sells it for me, what does this mean for the future of creative arts? Because first, and you talked about this, I think the fact is, once you have his voice, that means you never have to pay another person to be that voice. And I think as much as the other people I've heard try to do his voice, I think haven't been as good. I think that it takes away jobs from future actors and things like that. And I don't think that's a good thing. And I think if, the more and more we allow that, if these studios build up huge amounts of AI voices, at some point, there's not a need to hire another voice actor again, because they just have the AI for all these people. And as you said, most people are not going to get the sweetheart deal he did. Like, I think it's very explicit in James Earl Jones's contract with them that this is only used for Vader. But as you said with the SAG, like they want to be able to, have it be boilerplate language that any character you play, you're consenting to have your image and voice used for AI of other characters in the future. And I think SAG has put a pause on that, but it's still a fight that's going to be happening. So that is definitely a big concern for me. But I think the other is also what it says about creativity in general and what we're going to get out of media. Because I love Star Wars. I want to see as much Star Wars as I can. I'll admit 5 years ago, I would have said the same thing about Marvel. But now I'm really kind of tired of Marvel and wishing that Marvel was taking up a lot less of the air in the room so that other things could get started. And I do wonder at times how many other interesting new takes on science fiction aren't being made because instead the studios are saying, okay, but what if we did another Star Wars show or another Star Wars movie or Star Wars video game instead? And don't get me wrong, like I've really enjoyed all of those things, but even if it's just in Star Wars, if Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill, like all the Star Wars actors did that, to me, what that means is we're going to get an eternity of stories set during the Skywalker saga. And I'm really kind of sick of those. We talked about The Acolyte a lot, and yeah, I had a lot of problems with it. So did you. But I found it so refreshing to have a story that wasn't told during the years of the Skywalker saga. And I think that there is there's an old adage that I think is sometimes true, sometimes not, but that, restrictions breed creativity. And I do think there's some truth to that of if you tell a story with a certain number of actors and then those actors age or die or just go on to other things, now you have to go on to other things too. And I think that's a really good thing. And I'm scared about the idea that every IP, because we get, all of their, like at least in Marvel, we've had to move on to the second generation now of heroes because a lot of the actors were either aging or just didn't want to do this anymore. And now some of them do, and RDJ is coming back, and I think that's terrible. But at least there was some degree of like, we have to have a new Captain America. We have to have new versions of this because the actors are aging. And you take that away, I don't want, 8 million movies of Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. Like, as amazing as I thought their chemistry was on screen, I think I've had enough of that. I'm ready for new actors to tell new stories, both in Marvel and also outside of it.
Yeah. It's so I mentioned the Indiana Jones thing, and when I was watching the scene of Harrison Ford, like video game, like de-aged, it's like they should have just gotten Alden Ehrenreich, who played the young Han Solo in the movie Solo, right? And it's a different performance. It's not what Harrison Ford would have done, but I found it delightful. The movie itself, like structurally, has some issues, but I found Alden Ehrenreich's performance delightful and a great addition to like the canon and history of the character of Han Solo. And it's like there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with letting a different person do their own interpretation of this character in a different place. Because in Star Wars, we already have this rich history of the cartoons and the voice actors giving different performances to these people that we love. And we can acknowledge that those are different. They're not the same, but it's part of the character's history now in canon. And so I don't understand why in live action we have to cling to like only this person can do this performance. There are, of course, situations where you want to be respectful. I think like you talk about Marvel, Chadwick Boseman as Black Panther, T'Challa, like that's a very difficult situation because he passed during, like where they are still developing the character. And I think recasting that, like you have to be very sensitive to that situation. And I thought they handled it in a good, respectful way that honors the performer and the character. So, but like we're talking about Darth Vader, like it's a voice. It is already like a multiple composite performance where you have in live action, like you have a man in a suit, And now they've been getting Hayden Christensen, right, to come back and reprise the role of the suit. But even then, there are still multiple, I believe, stunt performers who wear the suit, or a different suit, I suppose. And so, like, this character of Darth Vader, in my opinion, is already such a composite of so many things. Like, as iconic and as much as I love James Earl Jones's performance, I think we can move on. We're not going to, because he signed, they paid a lot of money, but
yeah, I think there's so many good points there. First, I just want to honor, because I think his name almost never gets mentioned. David Charles Prowse is the person who was in the suit, and
yeah, the original,
and was doing the voice for all the acting, because the person who Mark Hamill was acting against was him in the suit, and I think here's another case of actors not being treated well. He didn't know his voice was being replaced till he went to see the movie himself at the premiere, which I think is like, and I think having it be a voice actor like James Earl Jones makes total sense. But also talk about not respecting the actor, who the voice is such a big part of him, but the physicality of that character is a big part of him as well. And I think you can't take that away, and think about what made that character so powerful. I think one of the things that I keep thinking about is that, like when I used to argue, I'm not going to go on that tangent. I think one of the things that happens with AI performances a lot is that people will say, okay, AI itself isn't the problem. The problem is that the actor isn't treated well, or the problem is that it doesn't look right on screen, or like, and in many cases, I feel like this is the perfect case, because here the actor fully consented and clearly was in a position where, like, James Earl Jones had made a lot of money before this happened. I don't think the studio had any kind of manipulative power of telling 80-year-old James Earl Jones, you'll never work in this town again if you don't do this. Like, the studio had none of that power in this case. He got to set the terms. He got to do it on his own. And as you said, although it is a live action performance, he's still a voice actor. Like, what he did is no different than what Matt Latner did to be the voice of Anakin in the Clone Wars. Obviously the performance is not animated, but he is a voice actor in that regard. And so I think this is kind of a chance to kind of scrape away all those tangential concerns about AI and look at just the idea of it itself. And I think, what we're coming to is, I just don't want it. As much as I don't love hearing other people do the voice of Darth Vader, maybe I'll get used to that, or maybe we'll just decide we've had enough Darth Vader content. And I think I'm very okay with that second option, like you said, and or sometimes the first option.
I mean, it's such an iconic voice that if they were to recast the voice, and again, like, I'm pretty sure that other people have done it in media, like, here and there, and have done so credibly in a way that it wouldn't be that distracting. Just do it. Like, imagine if they held an open audition, say like, hey, we want a new Darth Vader voice. They would find someone that would do an amazing job, right? Like, the people that would come out of the woodworks, like this American Idol of Darth Vader, like, a lot of people would wash out. You'd have terrible Vader voices. Like, I'm not even gonna try, but you would find someone that most of the fan base would be happy with, or just not even know that it wasn't. Like, not to say that, like, James Earl Jones is not unique, but if the performance, like, if the movie or whatever, the TV show is good, you wouldn't notice, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Like, it wouldn't be a distraction if
well,
you
and
recast.
I think there's two things there. I think to people like myself, and it sounds like maybe to you, or maybe not for you, I think it's always going to be a distraction for me, because I heard James Earl Jones as a kid and it was so imprinted on my brain. But I'm just one generation, and most Star Wars fans are a lot younger these days. Like, we're talking about his performances in movies that are 41 to 47 years old at this point. And he had some reprisals and things like that, but in terms of movies he had a major role in, I think for me, I would feel like I'm ready for, well, let me put it this way. I would want like a good 5 or 10 years to pass before you start that casting process. Like, and I'll give you another example. For me, Hugh Jackman is and always will be Wolverine. And I know this is a weird case because I'm a dirty casual, so I didn't have him in the comic books and in the shows before then. But so for me, the idea that you're going to recast him now is one I hate. If you tell me in 10 years, 15 years, you're going to bring in Wolverine and it's going to be someone who's not Hugh Jackman, yeah, fine. I feel like enough time has passed. But doing it right now is something I really object to because for me, he is Wolverine and I don't know why we need a new one. And
well, because he's old.
well, yeah, but I mean, if you saw a Deadpool movie, he's still good at that. But my point is, why do we need to tell new? I don't like the idea that at every point in time we have to have the ability to make a Batman and a Spider-Man and an X-Men and a Star Wars movie. Like, I'm okay with the idea that just we're just gonna take a break from that character or that media for a while.
And okay, on Hugh Jackman, he's old. I mean, like 50 or something, but he's getting to the point where he's too old to play this action hero, right? He's also too tall, Matthew. Like that this has always been one of the complaints about Hugh Jackman Wolverine is that in the comics, Wolverine is supposed to be a short king, like I don't know, like 5'2", something like that. And it's like this man is like 6 feet tall, like, and he's standing like shoulder to shoulder with Cyclops. Like this is not Wolverine. Like people, there are legitimate parts of the fandom that have always been upset about that. So I think in recasting, if they cast a short king, a lot of people would be excited. And I've seen like people who want Harry Potter guy, Daniel Radcliffe, like because he's starting to like grow into this look. It's like, oh yeah, I could see him as Wolverine. I think he had a movie where he played like a werewolf or something like that, or someone who turns into an animal. And they're like, oh, this is like a very good Wolverine performance. So for me, like I always want to see like people try something, and sometimes you try something and it's not good. I can't think of like a great example off the top of my head, but that's okay, right? Like that's art. That's performance. And it's okay if you say, I don't like this performance as much as the other one. I just like, to me, like AI is not, I mean, some parts of it is a performance. So do you want to talk about Alien Romulus real quick?
Oh, well, let me get to that in a second. Let me just respond with one last thing about because as I said, I am a dirty casual. I never experienced Wolverine as a short character. And I think both of those positions are valid. I think it's very okay for someone to say, my Wolverine is the one I learned about in comics or in the original animated show or something else. So for me, Wolverine has to be short. I think it's also okay for me to say Hugh Jackman is my Wolverine. That's what I expect of him. And it puts me in mind of a conversation I had a number of years ago that at the time made me very uncomfortable. Not very uncomfortable, made me like annoyed as a fan. I say that in the kind of like, we see how much toxicity there is. I wasn't actually that angry. I was just like, oh my God, how could you? But in a fanish way. Don't be toxic about this stuff. Because I was talking to someone who had grown up with the prequels and then had at a much later, for whatever reason, they hadn't watched the original movies, but they'd watched the prequels over and over again. And then at a later date, watch the prequels, watch the originals. And they were like, I don't really like James Earl Jones's performance. And I was like, what do you mean? And he doesn't sound anything like what Anakin would have grown into.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And, a part of me was just like, no, how could you? You're wrong, you foolish kid. And that's the whole point that's why we have the Star Wars Generations podcast. It's all about like this person's Anakin Skywalker who becomes Darth Vader was and always been Hayden Christensen with a little bit of Matt Latner thrown in. And James Earl Jones didn't fit that. And it's like you have that right to that opinion. It is not my opinion, but that's legitimate for them. If that's their experience, and I think that that's good because I do think that, I look, for example, at a character like Batman. I love that there is no one person who is thought of as the definitive Batman.
Kevin.
Well, right. Lots of people have their own favorites. Kevin Conroy is going to be top of the list for many people. Christian Bale is going to be top of the list for many people. Michael Keaton for others. And for others, it's going to be Adam West, the guy from the Batman 66 TV show. But none of them are thought of as like, there's always going to be fights about it. Again, I don't want 100 more years of Darth Vader stories or 50 more, but if in 50 years, because that's let me start that again. But think about that. Like from Adam West to today is 60 years. I don't want another 60 years of Darth Vader stories, but if we get 60 years of Darth Vader stories, and at the end of it, someone's like, yeah, each of these new voice actors had a new take on it and a new spin on it and a new interpretation of this character. That to me is much better than just having James Earl Jones pre-recorded doing it again and again and again.
Yeah. So a couple of quick things. You keep saying Matt Latner. The voice actor is Matt Lanter.
Oh, you're right. Okay.
Inverting the N and
he's the voice actor of Anakin. And I've always said, to me, he is much more my Anakin than Hayden Christensen. I've come to recognize Hayden Christensen is a good actor. He just had terrible direction and dialogue. But yeah, people can disagree on that. But thank you for getting that name right. I'm terrible with those. He was the voice actor in the Clone Wars TV show.
Yeah. And then second thing, Daniel Radcliffe is listed publicly as 5'5", which I believe is still taller than canonical Wolverine in the comics, but it's short enough, like shorter than the average, height of a man, especially like presented against other actors that you might have in a rebooted X-Men. So like I'm kind of getting on board this Daniel Radcliffe train, y'all.
Maybe.
Let us know.
So let's talk about some other AI that's been in media recently, because we're talking, for me, as science fiction people, as ethics people, etc., there's kind of two main ways we can approach the topic of AI. One is AI in terms of the creative process of the movies and TV shows and video games, and the other is AI as a story point in those things. And this is kind of a loose connection, but it's how we're going to wrap up, because there's been a couple of interesting examples of it that I think we're just going to touch on here. And then one of them we'll go into in more detail in the bonus content, but we're probably going to do some follow-up episodes on them as well. So let's talk first about Alien Romulus.
Yeah, so this is going to be a kind of spoiler, not for like the plot of the movie, but for a character who appears in the movie. So if you're interested in seeing that movie like completely free of any information, I guess like skip ahead. But in the movie, the new Alien Romulus, the newest in the Alien franchise, they have a character who I guess is also AI. I can't remember what they're called in universe, but it's like a android, right? An artificial human. They have had pretty much like one of these characters in every Alien movie, and in this newest one of the artificial people is played by, and I'm gonna use air quotes, played by Ian Holm, who played the original artificial human in the 1979 Alien.
Right.
And the actor passed away, I think like 3 or 4 years ago, and did not sign like any kind of contract like James Earl Jones. What I have read is that his widow gave the studio, the director, permission to use his likeness in this movie. And then what they did was they had like an actual actor like in the scenes and like saying the lines, like with David Prowse. And then they, whatever they do, they overlaid with their Ian Holm skin in post-production and voice, AI voice, to sound like Ian Holm. And I have not seen the movie, but when I heard about this, I said, I don't want to see this movie anymore, because that's
fair.
And I've spoken to several people who did see the movie, and I asked them specifically about this, like, hey, like the character, right? Like, and they're like, yeah, it was distracting. It was not like they found it unsettling, like in the uncanny valley. and I don't even know if they knew that the actor had passed, but they could tell like that this was not a real person
Yeah.
in the performance. And that's where we are, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the technology is not there. I don't know if the technology will ever be there
Mm-hmm.
because it's technology. It's not human. Like human, I do think there's something like in the soul, right? Like of a human performance, and I just not
Yeah.
happy. Not happy with the situation. The widow gave consent, so I guess like legally they're fine. They
Mm-hmm.
did pay, right? Like they paid the performer, the stand-in performer who was there and all that. So it's not like they got a free performance like from that
Mm-hmm.
legal perspective. It's still just, you know, like I said, like it's
Yeah.
like why would you do that? Like it's already an AI, an artificial person, right? And they have used other characters like Michael Fassbender in the Covenant, etc. Prometheus and Covenant. He was an artificial person. So the franchise already has this precedent of like there are multiple models, so to speak,
Yeah.
of artificial people. So like why would you have to have that one? Is my thing. It's like just let's move on.
Yeah. It seems nuts to me. Um, I hadn't been aware of that, so and I apologize. I was confused. I thought you were going to be bringing up how AI was in that story, but I think this is even more relevant. And yeah, like first of all, there's a part of me like I love and adore my spouse. She can speak for me in so many occasions. I I don't know how I feel about the idea that a spouse or children gets to decide what is done with the literal likeness of a person. You know, with
Mm.
like
And
obviously
I'm
they're the closest people who can give consent, but I don't know if that is the full consent of the person, unless you can say like this person's, you know, I'll trust a widow who says, "Oh, my spouse always told me they would love to live on in AI or whatever." But you know, when it's just children saying or widows saying, like, "I think this is what they would be okay with," and certainly I'm okay with it. That to me, it's still not the full consent of the person.
or if they're making money off it, right?
Right? Exactly.
Like in a state, like again, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like a widow is the in theory the closest person
Hmm.
to Ian Holm, right? And I'm not going to disparage her or her decision.
Yeah. No. No. Of
Like,
course.
but it gets like, what if 200 years from now they're still making Star Wars movies? Or I guess not Star. Let's say Alien. Let's say 200 years from now they're still making Alien movies, and the new Alien movie they're like, we want to have this character again. Talk to the great grandchild of Ian Holm and get consent. Like that person like never even met them. They're not gonna
Yeah.
know at all. And so like if you think about it, like it's
I,
going to continue to get complicated.
I mean, and you don't even need the hypothetical of going that far because for people who are there's been a lot of discussion with the new Lords of the Rings TV show, The Rings of Power, which I the first season was amazing. I've heard really good things about the second. I haven't seen it yet. But there's a lot of questions about what topics are they or are they not allowed to touch. And I don't know the details of this, but my understanding is that part of the story is that the Tolkien estate, there's some conflict and different members of the Tolkien estate
There you go.
disagree
Yeah.
on how much of the works of J.R.R. Tolkien they want to make available to different filmmakers and TV show creators and things like that. So yeah, these are
Yeah.
definitely things that happen, and I do think the rights to IP are fundamentally different than the rights to um the actual creation, the actual person and voice and things like that. But it's all part of a piece. And so if it's happening just with IP, of course it's going to happen with voice acting and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I apologize to you if, like that I didn't make this clear enough that what I wanted to talk about with Alien, but I think it also plays interestingly into the themes of the movie franchise itself and
Mm,
AI, as you said, because it seems like they're just like by using this AI performance, like melded performance, they're kind of missing the point. Like it does not seem
right.
like it was an intentional point of like AI and also like exploitation, right? Like I think the Alien franchise has a long history of highlighting exploitation of workers
Hmm. Yeah.
via by a multi-galactic company, Weyland Yutani, basically like using human beings as fodder to test or like get control of the xenomorph.
Right.
Right, like that's always been a theme. Like the character in Aliens, the second one, is basically like, yeah, these Marines are expendable. Like my company has tasked me to like bring back these eggs.
Right.
And it doesn't matter how many people die.
No, I think it's a great point, and that's counterplayed with the fact that Ian Holmes gives a very powerful and sympathetic portrayal to the point where you understand why the characters have developed feelings for for their coworker, and that are challenged when they realize he's an android.
I think you're thinking of a Ian Holm, like in the original one, I can't remember his name. He was the corporate character who was like ready to kill humans.
Oh,
I think
you're
you
right.
might
Okay.
be thinking of Lance Henriksen in the second one. Definitely was a
Yes, you're right. Thank you.
passionate android.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of.
Real quick, let's see. What was the character's name? I think Bishop was the second one. Ash. Ash was the name of
Yes, that's right. Okay, thank you.
the first one.
But yeah, just more proof that it's been a recurring theme in this.
Yeah.
And so we're almost at an hour. We're at an hour already, and I don't want this to go too much longer. But let's at least touch on the other mention of AI that you brought up, Terminator. Terminator has gotten, obviously, it's been about AI from the very beginning, from the first movie of the early 80s. And the principal story of it has always been that if Skynet becomes sentient, Skynet will realize that humanity would be afraid of it, and so it will act first and attack and start this nuclear war to wipe out humanity. And in most of the movies, the idea that Skynet is anything but just the pure antagonist has never really been questioned. And then recently, there's been a couple of more recent things that question it a little bit, but mostly not. But then much more recently has been just a couple of days ago when we're recording this, but it will probably be a couple weeks later that this comes out because of the hiatus. But just more recently, only a couple of days ago of when we're recording this, but it'll probably be a couple of weeks later when the episode comes out, we now have Terminator Zero on Netflix, which is an anime story set in the Terminator universe, and it's got full permission from the Terminator people, and it's canonical. It's very much building on the other stuff that's established in the other movies, and it has a lot of interesting things to say about time travel, which I will talk about in a different episode. But it also takes a very different take on AI. Talk a little bit about that, Riki, and sort of how you felt about it and how you felt it connected to this.
Gosh, I don't know. I don't know if I love this or hate this. Like this is the Terminator Zero I'm talking about specifically. It is such a complicated thing that they've created and added to Terminator, which has always been complicated in a way because time travel, but they open like multiple cans of worms.
Yeah.
In this very short series that I was like, I can't believe they're doing this to the franchise. And I'm not saying that like doing this to the franchise as like condemning it, but again, like they have changed. I think they've changed the rules of time travel. It's hard to tell.
They definitely played with the rules of time. I want to keep that for a whole separate episode.
Okay, so AI. Well, they introduced a second AI in this. So in the Terminator franchise, Skynet becomes self-aware on I believe August 28th or 29th. We just passed Judgment Day. But it's 1997. So 1997, Skynet becomes self-aware and nukes humans.
Right. Well, and then in later movies, because of time travel playing with things, there's another version of the timeline where actually 2024. But that's a whole other thing. But yeah, that's why people were just recently being like, "Oh, that was the day."
But this series resets to 1997, and they send time travelers, and it takes place in a 1997 that is different from like original timeline 1997 because the technology is much better.
Right.
It's improved, especially like the robot AI. Like, and it's interesting because it is a Japanese anime with Japanese voice acting taking place in Tokyo. in 1997, and they have like these robots. What are they called? Like I, Nino or something like that.
Enco, I think they're called. That's at least I listen to the English subs, so I think
There are like robot maids, basically servants.
Mm-hmm.
And then the new AI Kokoro takes control of them and uses them to subjugate, I guess, Tokyo, all of Japan. I'm not sure. It ends on a kind of a cliffhanger. Skynet still becomes self-aware.
Yeah, I'm gonna have us back that up just because I don't want to do spoilers because it's so new.
Okay.
You want to just say, but like it goes in interesting directions with where these things go or something?
I don't even know what to say. I mean,
I can jump in if you want.
Yeah, like,
yeah, I don't want to spoil anything, but I think we can say that it really plays with the idea of, does AI have to be the enemy of mankind, and also, is AI wrong to be the enemy of mankind? And I don't want to get into a review of the show. I do think that it opens too many cans of worms for what it tries to explore, and that is a little bit of a strike against the show. I'll also say that at midnight last night, I planned to watch one episode just to have a basic idea of it so we could talk about it today. And then 4 hours later, went to bed having watched almost the entire show and then finished it this morning. So it is a very compelling, very good to watch show. And what I think I liked about it most is the idea of our concept of AI is incredibly different than what it was in 1983 or 84 when that movie was first made. And there's actually a kind of bridge point for anyone who's seen the movie Terminator Genesis, the one with Emilia Clarke in it. It was kind of panned. I think it's actually a very good movie. It's kind of a reboot in a weird way of the original, playing with this idea of timelines. But it introduced the idea that, AI, instead of being a control of all the military, that AI was actually going to be the thing that made all the technology in your life talk to each other, which is something that we have to some extent in our world. Nowhere near the extent that it's going to be there, but this movie is a lot about kind of like the dangers of that and the dangers of how that can be exploited and things like that. And I think that having it be this of, in this, it's kind of not really clear because the focus isn't on Skynet. The focus is much more on this Japanese AI that's being built. And yeah, we'll talk about it more in the bonus segment, but I'm really glad that you suggested I watch it because I had not heard of it. And I think it is just, for me, it really put to light that I think when we use AI, there are two very different meanings we have. One is actual sentience, which becomes self-aware and self-actualized and now becomes an independent actor with incredible power that we have to deal with. And this is the Skynet, this is Ultron, this is things like that. In our own world, like, there's absolutely no discussion that like James Earl Jones's avatar is going to become self-aware or sentient in the net. That's not what this is about. There's no sentience happening here. This is just about computers doing tasks of such great magnitude that they can create recreations of things that we never thought possible. But there's absolutely nothing new being created. There's no sentience. There's no like independent thought happening within what we're talking about in terms of AI today. And so I kind of think AI is the wrong term for all of this. And I wish we had something better to use.
So yeah, the original Skynet was a United States like defense computer program that they were kind of like turning over things to because they thought it would compute things faster or whatever, right? Like it's and then in 1997 it becomes self-aware and it decides like it has to end humanity because humans suck. True statement. Please don't end. And it because it only has control of the United States, it fires all of the United States nukes at, I guess it was Russia at the time.
Right.
Not the Soviet Union, but they still have nukes. And then because like this is how our world is constructed, Russia launched all its nukes in retaliation at the United States because like, well, they're shooting at us, we're going to shoot at them. And it's notable. I think that's very notable in this like exploration of AI in the fictional universe,
Mm-hmm.
Skynet could not fire Russian nukes. It
Right.
only had access to the US nukes. So it had to use them to provoke Russia to launch their nukes. And that's how like Skynet destroyed everything. Now what we're talking about, like the Genesis model, the I think what we're getting in Terminator Zero, like this, because of the internet and like this collectivized computer network, we are getting a different model of AI, which is like just out there. Like Skynet was just probably like in some bunker.
Yeah.
Under the Pentagon or wherever.
If you've seen War Games, I think Terminator was already in development, but Skynet's a lot like the Whopper in War Games.
But now like our concept of AI, there would not be like a single hard point.
Right.
Like there would not be one computer that you could point to and be like, that's Skynet. If we destroy that, we're good. Now, if there's a Skynet, it's just everywhere. It's like it's on my laptop, it's on my iPhone, like it's all interconnected.
I remember that's a key point of the second Avengers movie, Ultron, is that they destroy the physical body, but he uploads his mind to the internet and then just lives in the internet.
Yeah.
And so anyway, lots of interesting stuff here. We're going to talk more about Terminator Zero in the bonus content. For everyone else, though, of course, please think about becoming a member. Please think about all the ways you can give us feedback. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Most importantly, though, we have spoken. Welcome back, members. So this is going to have a lot of spoilers for Terminator Zero. We're not going to go too long. We're going to talk a little bit, kind of our general thoughts on it. And then, like I said, this is definitely going to be a show that inspires a lot more episodes from us. But Riki, just kind of overall, what did you think? You kind of talked about how you loved some parts of it, you hate some parts of it.
Yeah, overall, if I were going to like rate it, I guess I'd say I didn't like it.
Interesting. Okay.
Like I watched all of it. I made you watch it, and I was like, I didn't like it. Terminator to me, and this gets back to what we were talking about like Darth Vader and like the perpetual performance of James Earl Jones. Terminator to me is Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's like very iconic, right? As the T-800. And I already had issues with which one was that? Terminator, the one that actually takes place in the future with John Connor.
Oh yeah, with Christian Bale. I think it's Terminator Salvation.
There you go, Salvation. In that one, they have like a composite performance of a Terminator that's like a different human stand-in, like bodybuilder stand-in, but then they composite Arnold Schwarzenegger's face on it. And at that point, I was like, do we need to be doing this? And so I like that the Terminator Zero is moving on. Yeah. The Terminator in this, it's animated. So like they could have drawn it as Arnold, and they chose not to. And I'm like, good.
Yeah, I really
Let's move on. Like, not all of these need to look like Arnold, because that's kind of silly, actually, especially like from the perspective of what they're supposed to be, like infiltrators. It's like if you're living in the future and you're like, hey, look, there's an Arnold Schwarzenegger coming towards us, like that's clearly a Terminator infiltrator, right? Like obviously you want to make different models. So I'm glad they're moving on. Like I'm more ambivalent about them moving on from Skynet, I guess. The second AI, Kokoro, kind of confused me because I don't understand why she has to exist. It's a female voice, so I'm gonna call her she. Because it's like, are they gonna fight against each other, like Skynet versus Kokoro? Like, what's going on here? And like, why do they? I mean, you can disagree, like, because they're individuals at this point,
right?
But given the connectivity thing we're talking about with AI, you would think that they would somehow like have this merging, I guess. But I don't know. I don't know where it's going.
Yeah, it is very confusing to me. Like, I think the show raised a lot of great questions. I'm not sure I agree with all the answers that kind of put forward. but I think I just found the show really captivating and riveting. And one thing I want to say is, yeah, it is a Japanese show. It is definitely anime, and it sounds like the Japanese voice actors were very good. It seems very clear that if I understand correctly, Netflix like produced the show always intending to also have English speaking voice actors, and the subs are very well done, and they got a very good cast. Andre Holland is Malcolm. Rosario Dawson is the voice of Kokoro. Timothy
Oh,
Oliphant is the voice of the
oh,
right. Like, yeah, to me, this is not the normal. Okay, let's find some sub actors. Like, I feel like they basically just hired 2 sets of voice actors.
sure, or more. I don't know if there are other language options.
Right?
And
Which,
that's the thing you can do with anime and,
yeah,
and
exactly.
animated shows, which is that's why I think like animation needs to become more mainstream. Kids, like it is very violent. Like
Yes.
let's get that out of the way too.
Yeah, and very gory, violent in
Yes.
those kind of
Yeah,
shows.
yeah, very graphic, which
Yeah.
is something you can do in animation because it's less impactful. The gore,
Mhm.
like you can kill people in ways that you cannot kill people in live action. I mean, you can, but it
Yeah.
gets you an R rating.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, the ending left me a little disappointed, but I want to think about it more and maybe watch it again, because it one of the central idea they come up with is to give again here massive spoilers. Malcolm is himself from the future, and he starts to play. They get a CPU from a captured Terminator, and he uses that to kind of build his own AI, and then has the idea that if he goes back in time and creates this other AI specifically created with the knowledge of Skynet being a possibility, and with the hope that this AI can do battle with that AI, then something that might make a difference. And
Yeah, that he can have a conversation with it. Like the first half of the show, he's just literally having a conversation, trying to convince Kokoro
yeah,
to fight against Sky to stop Skynet. Be like, can't you see? Like, isn't humanity worth saving?
and it's a little frustrating, because I feel like that, like, if you enjoy the conversations between Picard and Q, not when they're flirting, which is also fun, but just in the like discussing whether humanity should survive, like that's very much what this is. And Kokoro
Yeah,
makes some very good points about maybe Skynet is right, and where does all that go? And then you get to a point where you realize that if Kokoro fights back, it's not that they're going to fight against each other like in the web, kind of like the way Jeeves tries to fight Ultron in that movie, but it's
Vision.
that Jarvis, sorry, not Jeeves, Jarvis.
Oh
Thank
yeah, I guess it was Jarvis at that point.
But that somehow Kokoro is going to get access to a whole bunch of other nuclear missiles that can then be fired to stop the nuclear missiles from, like, it doesn't make any sense. And it leads to some interesting graphics of missiles flying through the air, including a very repeated shot of missiles falling down to hit Japan specifically. That I want to hear your thoughts on it another episode.
Well, Japan is
But
protected. She protects Japan,
yeah, exactly.
which felt very intentional.
Yeah, very much so. But like, there's this one shot of like from space the missile, and you see the full outline of the Japanese islands. It's like, ooh, that's a thing.
Yeah, but they've
Um,
done that. Like I think Akira did that.
yeah.
As a
So
trope.
yeah, I found the ideas that it raised incredibly interesting, and they go into this thing about spirit, and like the portrayal of the 3 different aspects of this AI, which are also all one, but not a Trinitarian way, which I appreciated. Um, it felt very spiritual to me, and I kind of like the way I think of anime
Mhm.
people talking to spirits. Um,
Yeah.
it felt like it was intentionally referencing that in ways that I felt were a little weird for a computer, but were also an interesting take on it.
Yeah, so the thing for me with this type of AI character
Mm-hmm.
is that like Skynet and other portrayals like it take the sum experience and knowledge and information about humanity, and then like do the super fast calculations and conclude that humanity should end
Right.
because it's too dangerous for itself, for other animals like the planet Earth. And this is like a very 20th century like nuclear weapon allegory, like, and it's almost always the nukes are used to end humanity, like the AIs do that, right? And my thing is like, yeah, AI ultimately, like, I don't believe, like, in our reality, it is very unlikely that we get sentience,
Right.
like in the Skynet sense. AI is currently and probably will be for the foreseeable future just like a simple reflection
Mm-hmm.
of humanity, of all of the information. And it's not going to make a decision like on its own. It's just going to show us what we as a collective think. And this is why, unfortunately, like when AI is used for quote unquote decision making, it is often racist,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because humanity, like most of humanity, is racist, and the information that we've put out there on the net has a racist skew, like with like the what is it, like images, like Google images and cropping and all that kind of stuff. And there's the have you heard the story about asking Chat GPT how many R's are in the word strawberry?
Oh yeah, I can't figure it out.
And I can't get it right. Like, it's not because AI is stupid. It's because like this is what we've taught it. And I don't know
Mm-hmm.
specifically the strawberry one, like what's causing the problem.
Yeah.
But all of these are a reflection of us. And like we can point and laugh at these stories like the strawberry story. But when it comes to like the racist stuff, like the algorithm, like racist algorithms, that's us. And we need to look inward. And
Yeah.
I think that is the story of AI and Skynet, is not that this thing is going to nuke us, but we have to like look inward and like, are we going to nuke ourselves? Like that's the most extreme example.
Right.
But again, like we have to examine, like, are we racist? And I have always said I am racist because that's how I was raised. That is
Mm-hmm.
what I took. And like in a sense, we are all like individualized AIs of like collecting everything around us and what we see, portrayals in media,
Yeah.
you know, how the news is presented to us. Everything is skewed, and we become skewed. Like it's unavoidable, and we have to really dig deep and say like, I am racist, like but I don't want to be, right? Like that's the next step, is to
Right.
try to erase that programming, like all programming, right?
Yeah.
And to try to make better decisions, or at least to recognize when our decisions are being skewed.
And I think
And rant.
I think there's two really important points there. One is that there's been this battle for a long time of like, should you use logic or should you use emotion to make decisions? And I think we're mostly moving past that, and part understanding that like denying your emotions is fundamentally illogical. Like it's just a fundamental part of how we think. But it's one reason why AI has often been held up by the folks on the other side of that, saying like AI will make the best decision without any
Right.
emotion,
That it's
without any,
objective.
without sentiment, without compassion. And
But it's a composite of millions or billions of subjective opinions that humans
that
have collected and put out.
because to make the decision that, and I think this TV show does a really good job of illustrating this, even if I wish it had gone deeper, to decide that all of humanity will kill me, and so I must kill all of humanity. The only way that makes sense is if your sense of self-survival is so strong that you place your own value over the value of literally all other human life, or all human life.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that the show kind of gets into is this idea of Skynet thinks that way because it was designed by humans who think that way.
Yeah.
And that all of human history has been my survival slash the survival of me and of all the people who I personally care about, whether that's my family, my tribe, my religion, my race, my whatever it is. that their value is ahead of everyone else's. And that's, I think, often the kind of racism you're talking about, the sexism, whatever it is. And there's a very interesting point in the show that I'm troubled by, and I don't know how I feel about it, but I often think this is a relevant part of the question. I'm on record as often saying that I'm disappointed when superheroes are willing to say, I am going to give you, Mr. Villain, the power to kill millions or billions in order to save the life of this child that I care about or is a part of my family or something like that. And there's a moment in the show where Malcolm basically faces that moment of the Terminator says, you have to shut down your AI or else I will kill your son. And he's willing to let his son be killed. And there's a lot of coldness. Like, I don't think that act is portrayed as heroic in terms of like he's been portrayed as someone who's too focused on his work and not enough on his family. And we see how horribly traumatic it is for the kid, but it's also not villainous. It's kind of presented as, and it's one of the things that helps the AI learn that humanity can have more feelings than just its own individual survival and the survival of its pack or its family or its tribe or race or whatever. And I think I just really like that idea of questioning these things and of raising all of these questions.
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing for me that happened is that the whole timeline is messed up. Like, there's multiple timelines. I don't know, like, you'd have to draw a chart to figure out like who comes from what timeline and whether they actually interact with other characters from the future. But at one point, what they state is that the son of Malcolm is going to grow up to not be John Connor and lead the resistance, but to form a truce, to negotiate a truce between humans and I think Skynet in that future. That was interesting to me. And that's what I want if there's a season 2 for this to explore. Because rather than just fighting, it's like, how do we reconcile our differences, even with this machine that tried to wipe out humanity on Judgment Day, right? Like, that is probably the most interesting thing the Terminator franchise has done since its inception. It's like since the original concept of Skynet and like the time travel thing. So that was the thing I liked the most, but it like came very much towards the end as just almost like, oh yeah, by the way, he's gonna grow up and do this. It's like, what?
and there's a lot of, I feel like it handles AI a lot better than it handles time travel, but it makes some changes to the time travel discussion that I do appreciate. So, well, Ricky, this has been a great conversation. Do you have any last thoughts you want to add? We're definitely going to talk about this show probably in a couple of upcoming episodes.
So like when I said I didn't like it, I don't know. This thing, like that's the thing I'm most excited about. Is this future truce and how we get to that point. And I think the problem I have is that the show buried that lead for the final episode. And I don't know, like that should have been the thesis of the show somehow. Like somehow like mention that earlier and then show us like how he interacts with machines, with like the Terminator that comes back, etc. Because now I kind of have to watch it again to like see if there are hints of this, and it's like don't do that. Like don't Shyamalan me.
Okay. Well, Ricky may or may not be part of the discussions we're going to have about the show. That'll be up.
No, like I'm fine. I think they're interesting concepts.
Yeah.
But what I am pointing out is just my opinion, but is like a structural flaw with the show.
That's fair. I think that, like I said before, I think the show opens too many cans of worms that it has time to address.
Yeah, and that could be it. They're like trying to juggle too many interesting things, and then like, in my opinion, what was the most interesting got buried.
Yeah, that to me wasn't the most interesting, but I do think there are. I do agree with you that it felt like it should have gotten more than just kind of a 1 or 2 line thing, and I feel like that was intentionally setting us up for a season 2, and so maybe it's
yes,
like it's kind of incomplete at this point, but given the history of Netflix, we really got to hope now there's a season 2, you know?
Yeah,
And
well, for me, it's like I am a huge fan of the franchise, and too much of this was just like rehashing Terminator stuff.
Yeah.
And then we got to this thing. It's like, this is completely different from other Terminator stuff. I was like, wait a minute, why did we just like have so many episodes of just like more Terminator stuff?
It's funny. So as I was watching, I was redoing a lot of the wiring for my computer. So I had to like, for a lot of it, I'd be sitting in front of my desk, and then I'd have to climb under my desk. And at first I was pausing when I had to climb under my desk. And then eventually I just started climbing under my desk when there was a fight scene. So I was like, okay.
Yeah, that's like, and yeah, I don't know. I agree. Like a lot of TV shows these days, I do that. I'll just like leave the room when the people start fighting.
Yeah. All right. Well, Ricky, thank you so much. To our members, thank you. You're what really makes all this possible. We have spoken.